The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered porch of Willow Creek Ranch as Emma Caldwell clutched the foreclosure notice in her trembling hands. 6 months since Thomas's accident, and his family was already circling like vultures, waiting for her to fail. The bank wanted payment by the end of the month, money she simply didn't have. 27 years old and about to lose everything she and Thomas had built together. Mrs. Caldwell. Sheriff Dawson removed his hat, genuine regret in his weathered face. I'm real sorry about this. Your father-in-law insisted we deliver it official-like. Emma folded the paper carefully, maintaining what little dignity she had left. Thank you, Sheriff. I suppose Richard Caldwell wants to make sure I understand exactly where I stand. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sheriff shuffled uncomfortably. If there's anything I can do, unless you've got $50,000 hiding in that hat, I don't think there's much anyone can do now. Emma attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. 3 generations of Caldwells had worked this land, but apparently a daughter-in-law didn't count as family, not when prime cattle country was at stake. Emma watched the sheriff's truck disappear down the long driveway, dust billowing behind it like the last of her hopes. She tried everything, extra shifts at the diner in town, selling off equipment they could spare, even approaching the bank for an extension. Nothing had worked. Inside the ranch house, her coffee had gone cold. Every surface held memories. Thomas, teaching her to play poker at the kitchen table, his laughter echoing through rooms now silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock his great-grandfather had brought from Scotland. The phone rang, jarring her from her thoughts. You've seen the notice, I assume? Richard Caldwell's voice held no warmth, no acknowledgement that she was grieving the same man. Yes, Richard. Hard to miss when you send the sheriff. It's just business, Emma. You can't run that place alone, and the family has agreed to buy you out. $5,000 to walk away clean. More than fair, considering the circumstances. Emma's knuckles whitened around the receiver. 5,000? The east pasture alone is worth 10 times that. The east pasture isn't mortgaged to the hilt. His voice hardened. Thomas made poor decisions toward the end. We're being generous. The accusation stung worse than the insult of his offer. Thomas worked himself to the bone for this ranch, yet somehow left it drowning in debt. My offer stands until Friday. After that, we'll let the bank take it, and you'll get nothing. The line went dead before Emma could respond. She slammed the receiver down, fighting tears of frustration. Thomas had never mentioned financial troubles. The ranch had been profitable when he died. The cattle were healthy, the equipment paid for. Where had this mysterious debt come from? Emma pulled her husband's ledgers from the office shelf. Determination, replacing despair. Something wasn't adding up, and she had 3 days to figure out what before she lost everything. The next morning, Emma drove into Riverdale with the ledgers tucked safely beside her. Main Street hadn't changed in decades. Miller's General Store, Pete's Barbershop, and at the end, the imposing brick building housing First National Bank. She parked her battered pickup and straightened her one good blouse. Looking respectable. Wouldn't change the numbers, but it might make Stanley Weber, the bank manager, more inclined to listen. I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell, but these documents don't change anything. Stanley peered at her over reading glasses perched on his bulbous nose. The loan paperwork is quite clear. Your husband took out a significant second mortgage 8 months ago, and the payments are substantially in arrears. Emma shook her head. That's impossible. We made decisions together. He never mentioned another mortgage. Stanley's expression softened slightly. Sometimes men try to protect their wives from financial worries. Not Thomas, we were partners in everything. She pushed Thomas's ledger across the desk. Look here, our accounts were balanced. The ranch was profitable right up until... Until the accident. Stanley finished gently. I understand this is difficult, but the signature on the loan documents is your husband's. There's no mistake. Emma felt sick. May I see them? The loan documents. The bank manager hesitated. I suppose there's no harm. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Margaret, bring me the Caldwell Ranch file, please. While they waited, Emma stared at the framed photographs on Stanley's wall. Stanley with Richard Caldwell at the Rotary Club. Stanley and Richard at a charity golf tournament. The two men had known each other for decades. Would Stanley really show her everything? A middle-aged secretary delivered a thick folder, and Stanley extracted several documents, sliding them across the desk. Emma's heart sank when she saw Thomas's familiar signature at the bottom of the loan application. It requested $200,000 for ranch improvements and expansion. But Thomas had never mentioned improvements or expansion. And the date, just 2 weeks before his truck had veered off Miller's Bridge into the river below. She cleared her throat. Is there any record of what happened to the money after it was approved? Stanley frowned. It would have been deposited into your ranch account, but it wasn't. I brought all our bank statements. She extracted them from her folder. There was never a deposit of that size. The bank manager studied the statements, his frown deepening. This is unusual. Perhaps it went into another account, one I'm not aware of. We only had the one business account. Emma leaned forward. Mr. Weber, something isn't right here. That money never reached us, but we're being foreclosed on because of it. Stanley removed his glasses, suddenly looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Caldwell, are you suggesting impropriety? Because that's a serious accusation. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm just trying to understand what happened to my husband's ranch. She gathered her documents. Thank you for your time. Outside, Emma sat in her truck, mind racing. The signature looked authentic, but nothing else made sense. Thomas would never have taken out such a large loan without discussing it with her. And where had the money gone? As she started the engine, a movement caught her eye. A tall figure in a worn leather jacket leaned against a black pickup across the street, watching her. When their eyes met, he tipped his hat slightly, then climbed into his truck and drove away. Emma shivered despite the warm spring air. She couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister than bad bookkeeping was behind her troubles. And now a stranger was watching her. Back at the ranch, Emma spread the papers across the kitchen table, searching for answers. The loan had been approved, the money disbursed, but it had vanished into thin air. And now, conveniently, the Caldwell family was pushing her to sell for pennies on the dollar. A knock at the door startled her. Emma wasn't expecting visitors, and solicitors rarely ventured this far from town. She approached cautiously, wishing she'd brought Thomas's shotgun down from the bedroom. Through the window, she saw him, the man from town. Up close, he was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe mid-30s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. Definitely not from Riverdale. Can I help you? She called through the door. Name's Jackson Wade. I need to talk to you about Thomas Caldwell and about that loan that's about to cost you this ranch. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma's heart hammered in her chest. How do you know about that? Because I've been tracking the Caldwell family for a long time, Mrs. Caldwell. And your husband didn't die in an accident. Emma's hand flew to the doorknob before she could think better of it. She pulled the door open, coming face to face with the stranger whose words had just shattered what little remained of her world. What did you just say about my husband? Jackson Wade's words hung in the air between them, heavy as storm clouds. Emma's fingers gripped the doorframe for support. You better have proof before saying something like that to a widow, she managed, voice steadier than she felt. His eyes, green, with flecks of amber, held no sympathy, just cold certainty. May I come in? What I have to show you isn't for prying eyes. Emma hesitated. Common sense screamed not to invite a stranger into her home, but the same instinct that had warned her about the loan told her this man held answers she desperately needed. 5 minutes. She stepped aside. And I keep my husband's rifle within reach. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Smart woman. Inside, Jackson surveyed the living room with a practiced eye, noting exits and windows before settling his tall frame into Thomas's armchair. The presumption stoked Emma's irritation. "Talk!" she demanded. Jackson withdrew a worn leather portfolio from his jacket. "I was U.S. Marshal for 12 years. Now I work private investigations." He passed her a business card. "6 months ago, I was hired to investigate financial irregularities at several ranches that were suddenly foreclosed and acquired by Greenfield Development Corporation." "What does this have to do with Thomas?" "Greenfield is a shell company." Jackson removed several photographs, laying them on the coffee table. "Its real owner is Richard Caldwell." Emma's breath caught. "My father-in-law?" "Your father-in-law has acquired 6 properties in the last 3 years. Each followed the same pattern: unexpected death of the owner, discovery of massive debt, quick sale at bottom prices." His eyes met hers. "Your husband was getting too close to the truth." Emma studied the photographs, aerial views of ranches, documents with highlighted passages, and surveillance shots of Richard with men she didn't recognize. "If what you're saying is true, why haven't you gone to the authorities?" "Financial crimes are difficult to prove without paper trails. Richard Caldwell is careful." Jackson leaned forward. "But he made mistakes with your husband's loan. The money was wired to an offshore account, but I traced it through a banking contact. It exists, Mrs. Caldwell, just not where it should be. And Thomas, you said it wasn't an accident." Jackson's expression darkened. "The brake lines on your husband's truck were cut. Clean, professional job. Local police missed it because they weren't looking for foul play." Emma's world tilted sideways. She'd spent 6 months accepting fate's cruelty. That rain-slicked roads and bad timing had stolen her future. The alternative was unthinkable. "Why should I believe you? You appear out of nowhere with accusations against one of the most respected men in the county." "Because you already suspect something's wrong." He nodded toward the papers strewn across her kitchen table. "And because of this." He slid a final photograph across the table. Emma's hand trembled as she picked it up. It showed Thomas outside the bank, arguing with Richard Caldwell. The date stamp showed 3 days before the accident. "Where did you get this?" "Bank security camera. My contact retrieved it before it could be accidentally erased." Emma remembered that day. Thomas had come home agitated, spending hours in his office with the door closed. When she'd asked what was wrong, he'd kissed her forehead and promised to explain everything after he sorted some things out. He never got the chance. "What do you want from me?" she asked, suddenly exhausted. "Access to your husband's personal files, anything that might connect Richard to the fraud, and permission to look around the property." His eyes softened slightly. "In return, I'll help you save this ranch." "Why do you care what happens to me or Willow Creek?" "Because the man who hired me died under suspicious circumstances 3 weeks ago." Jackson's jaw tightened. "This stopped being just a job a long time ago." Emma stood, walking to the window that overlooked the rolling pastures, where generations of Caldwells had raised cattle. The land that had become her home, now threatened by the very family that should have protected her. "I have until Friday to accept Richard's insulting buyout offer," she said finally. "After that, the bank takes everything. Then we've got 2 days to find what we need." Jackson stood. "Do we have a deal?" Emma turned, meeting his gaze directly. "On one condition, when this is over, I want Richard Caldwell to pay for what he did to Thomas. Not just financially. I want justice." "That's been my plan all along, Mrs. Caldwell." "Emma," she corrected. If we're going up against the most powerful man in the county, we might as well be on a first-name basis. By dusk, they had transformed Emma's living room into an investigation headquarters. Thomas's files covered every surface: financial records, correspondence, legal documents. Jackson worked methodically, his focus unwavering, as Emma brought coffee and continued her own search. Thomas wasn't much for technology, she explained, retrieving an old laptop from the office, but he kept digital backups of important documents. Jackson glanced up. Password protected. Our anniversary. Thomas was sentimental about things like that. Her voice caught as she typed in the date, unlocking access to her dead husband's digital life. Together, they discovered two significant findings: emails between Thomas and a state investigator about suspicious land acquisitions in the county, and a recorded phone conversation saved as an audio file. Emma clicked play, and Thomas's voice filled the room. "I know what you're doing, Dad. The shell company, the fraudulent loans, all of it. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? You've got 24 hours to come clean before I take everything to Investigator Phillips." Richard's response was chilling in its calm. "You've always been idealistic, son, just like your mother. But you're threatening things you don't understand. Be careful you don't lose more than just your inheritance." Emma's hand flew to her mouth. "That sounds like a threat," Jackson finished grimly. Date stamped 2 days before the accident. A thunderous knock at the front door made them both jump. Emma peered through the curtains, her stomach dropping. "It's Richard, and he's not alone." Jackson quickly gathered the documents, shoving them back into folders. "Any way out besides the front door?" "Kitchen door leads to the back pasture." She was already moving, grabbing her jacket and Thomas's laptop. "My truck's parked out back. Go. I'll create a distraction." Jackson pulled out his phone. "There's a motel on Route 16, the Pineview, room 112. Meet me there in an hour." "What about you?" Jackson Wade's words hung in the air between them, heavy as storm clouds. Emma's fingers gripped the doorframe for support. "You better have proof before saying something like that to a widow," she managed, voice steadier than she felt. His eyes, green, with flecks of amber, held no sympathy, just cold certainty. "May I come in? What I have to show you isn't for prying eyes." Emma hesitated. Common sense screamed not to invite a stranger into her home, but the same instinct that had warned her about the loan told her this man held answers she desperately needed. 5 minutes, she stepped aside, and I keep my husband's rifle within reach. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Smart woman. Inside, Jackson surveyed the living room with a practiced eye, noting exits and windows before settling, his tall frame into Thomas's armchair. The presumption stoked Emma's irritation. "Talk!" she demanded. Jackson withdrew a worn leather portfolio from his jacket. "I was U.S. Marshal for 12 years. Now I work private investigations." He passed her a business card. 6 months ago, I was hired to investigate financial irregularities at several ranches that were suddenly foreclosed and acquired by Greenfield Development Corporation. What does this have to do with Thomas? Greenfield is a shell company. Jackson removed several photographs, laying them on the coffee table. Its real owner is Richard Caldwell. Emma's breath caught. My father-in-law. Your father-in-law has acquired 6 properties in the last 3 years. Each followed the same pattern: unexpected death of the owner, discovery of massive debt, quick sale at bottom prices. His eyes met hers. Your husband was getting too close to the truth. Emma studied the photographs, aerial views of ranches, documents with highlighted passages, and surveillance shots of Richard with men she didn't recognize. If what you're saying is true, why haven't you gone to the authorities? Financial crimes are difficult to prove without paper trails. Richard Caldwell is careful. Jackson leaned forward. But he made mistakes with your husband's loan. The money was wired to an offshore account, but I traced it through a banking contact. It exists, Mrs. Caldwell, just not where it should be. And Thomas, you said it wasn't an accident. Jackson's expression darkened. The brake lines on your husband's truck were cut. Clean, professional job. Local police missed it because they weren't looking for foul play. Emma's world tilted sideways. She'd spent 6 months accepting fate's cruelty, that rain-slicked roads and bad timing had stolen her future. The alternative was unthinkable. Why should I believe you? You appear out of nowhere with accusations against one of the most respected men in the county. Because you already suspect something's wrong. He nodded toward the papers strewn across her kitchen table. And because of this, he slid a final photograph across the table. Emma's hand trembled as she picked it up. It showed Thomas outside. The bank, arguing with Richard Caldwell. The date stamp showed 3 days before the accident. Where did you get this? Bank security camera. My contact retrieved it before it could be accidentally erased. Emma remembered that day. Thomas had come home agitated, spending hours in his office with the door closed. When she'd asked what was wrong, he'd kissed her forehead and promised to explain everything after he sorted some things out. He never got the chance. What do you want from me? She asked, suddenly exhausted. Access to your husband's personal files, anything that might connect Richard to the fraud, and permission to look around the property. His eyes softened slightly. In return, I'll help you save this ranch. Why do you care what happens to me or Willow Creek? Because the man who hired me died under suspicious circumstances 3 weeks ago. Jackson's jaw tightened. This stopped being just a job a long time ago. Emma stood, walking to the window that overlooked the rolling pastures, where generations of Caldwells had raised cattle. The land that had become her home, now threatened by the very family that should have protected her. I have until Friday to accept Richard's insulting buyout offer, she said finally. After that, the bank takes everything. Then we've got 2 days to find what we need. Jackson stood. Do we have a deal? Emma turned, meeting his gaze directly. On one condition, when this is over, I want Richard Caldwell to pay for what he did to Thomas, not just financially. I want justice. That's been my plan all along, Mrs. Caldwell. Emma, she corrected. If we're going up against the most powerful man in the county, we might as well be on a first-name basis. By dusk, they had transformed Emma's living room into an investigation headquarters. Thomas's files covered every surface: financial records, correspondence, legal documents. Jackson worked methodically, his focus unwavering as Emma brought coffee and continued her own search. Thomas wasn't much for technology, she explained, retrieving an old laptop from the office, but he kept digital backups of important documents. Jackson glanced up. Password protected. Our anniversary. Thomas was sentimental about things like that. Her voice caught as she typed in the date, unlocking access to her dead husband's digital life. Together they discovered 2 significant findings. Emails between Thomas and a state investigator about suspicious land acquisitions in the county, and a recorded phone conversation saved as an audio file. Emma clicked play, and Thomas's voice filled the room. I know what you're doing, Dad. The shell company, the fraudulent loans, all of it. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? You've got 24 hours to come clean before I take everything to Investigator Phillips. Richard's response was chilling in its calm. You've always been idealistic, son, just like your mother. But you're threatening things you don't understand. Be careful you don't lose more than just your inheritance. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. That sounds like a threat, Jackson finished grimly. Date stamped 2 days before the accident. A thunderous knock at the front door made them both jump. Emma peered through the curtains, her stomach dropping. It's Richard, and he's not alone. Jackson quickly gathered the documents, shoving them back into folders. Any way out besides the front door? Kitchen door leads to the back pasture. She was already moving, grabbing her jacket and Thomas's laptop. My truck's parked out back. Go, I'll create a distraction. Jackson pulled out his phone. There's a motel on Route 16, the Pineview, room 112. Meet me there in an hour. What about you? Jackson's eyes confirmed what his lips didn't need to say. Elizabeth Caldwell was engaged to Stanley before her family pressured her to marry Richard instead. The socially advantageous choice. Emma slumped against the wall. The pieces were clicking into place with sickening clarity. That's why Stanley always seemed uncomfortable around me. I reminded him of her. Elizabeth died when Thomas was 15. Official cause was a riding accident. And the unofficial cause? Emma already knew the answer. Stanley believes Richard was responsible. He can't prove it, but he's spent 20 years gathering evidence of Richard's other crimes, waiting for the perfect moment. Jackson checked the parking lot through a gap in the curtains. We need to move. My truck's parked behind the building. They slipped out the back exit, keeping to the shadows. The night had turned cool, a light mist settling over the landscape as they reached Jackson's truck. We can't go to Stanley's home, Emma realized as they pulled onto the highway. Richard would look there first. We're not. Weber owns a hunting cabin near Cripple Creek. Off the grid, no paper trail connecting it to him. He's waiting for us there. Emma watched the dark landscape blur past, her mind racing. If Richard destroyed the ranch to eliminate evidence, doesn't that mean we've lost our chance to prove what he did? Not necessarily. The money trail still exists. With Stanley's banking expertise and your husband's notes, we have enough to trigger a federal investigation. Jackson's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. But we need to move fast. Once Richard realizes you escaped, he'll try to flee the country. A flash of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, gaining rapidly. We've got company, Jackson said, accelerating. Hold on! The pursuing vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows, pulled alongside them. The passenger window rolled down, revealing the barrel of a shotgun. Down! Jackson shouted, swerving sharply as the shotgun blast shattered his side window. Glass rained over them as Jackson fought to keep control of the truck. Emma's ears rang from the deafening report, her heart hammering against her ribs. Glove compartment! Jackson yelled over the wind, now howling through the broken window. Emma fumbled it open, finding a handgun nestled inside. Ever used one? He asked, swerving again as the SUV rammed their rear bumper. Thomas taught me. She checked the safety, with shaking hands, but I've never shot at a person. Aim for the tires if you can. Jackson jerked the wheel, taking a sharp turn onto a narrow forest road. Just keep them back until we reach the cabin. The SUV followed, headlights bouncing wildly as it hit the rutted dirt road. Emma rolled down her window, the cold night air whipping her hair as she leaned out, trying to steady her grip on the unfamiliar weapon. Her first shot went wide. The second caught the SUV's headlight, shattering it, and momentarily confusing the driver. They fishtailed, dropping back slightly before regaining control. Good, Jackson encouraged, navigating the increasingly rugged terrain. 2 miles to the cabin, we just need to stay ahead. The SUV surged forward again, this time ramming them hard enough to send Jackson's truck skidding toward the edge of the road, where a steep embankment dropped to the creek below. Time slowed as Emma felt the truck's wheels lose traction. Jackson fought the steering wheel, but momentum carried them over the edge. They were airborne for a heart-stopping moment before crashing down the embankment, trees and brush scraping against metal as they tumbled. The impact when they hit bottom knocked the breath from Emma's lungs. Her head struck the dashboard, despite her seatbelt, stars exploding behind her eyes. "Emma!" Jackson's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Emma, can you hear me?" she forced, her eyes open, tasting blood where she'd bitten her lip. Jackson was leaning over her, his own face bloodied from a cut above his eyebrow. "We need to move," he urged, already working at her seatbelt. "The truck's leaking fuel." The acrid smell registered through her daze. With Jackson's help, she crawled from the crumpled vehicle. Her ankle protested when she put weight on it, sprained, maybe broken. "I can't run," she gasped. Jackson glanced up the embankment where flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Their pursuers were making their way down. "You don't have to." In one fluid motion, he scooped her into his arms. "The cabin's less than a mile through these woods. We can make it." Emma wrapped her arms around his neck as he set off, moving with surprising speed despite his burden. Behind them, shouts echoed through the trees as Richard's men reached the wrecked truck. "They're not in the vehicle. Spread out. They can't have gone far." Jackson pressed deeper into the forest, his breathing labored but steady. Emma clung to him, pain pulsing through her ankle with each step he took. "Almost there," he whispered, after what seemed like hours. "See that light through the trees?" A warm glow beckoned from a small clearing ahead. As they approached, Emma made out a rustic cabin, smoke curling from its chimney. The door opened before they reached it, revealing Stanley Weber silhouetted against the firelight. "Good God!" the banker exclaimed, rushing to help. "What happened?" "Richards, men found us." Jackson carried Emma inside, gently setting her on a worn sofa. "They ran us off the road about a mile back." Stanley secured the door, drawing heavy curtains across the windows. "Are you hurt badly?" "Just my ankle." Emma grimaced as Jackson carefully removed her boot to examine the injury. "And some cuts and bruises." "Sprained, not broken," Jackson announced after gentle probing. "But it needs to be wrapped." Stanley disappeared into a back room, returning with a first aid kit. "How did they find you so quickly?" "That's what I'd like to know." Jackson's eyes narrowed as he began cleaning a nasty cut on Emma's forehead. "The motel was a temporary location. No one knew we were there except the housekeeper," Emma finished, wincing as antiseptics stung her wound. "The one who delivered the note about the ranch burning," Jackson nodded grimly, "which means either she was working for Richard or someone was watching the motel." "Or both," Stanley added, handing Jackson bandages for Emma's ankle. "Richard has half the county on his payroll, eyes everywhere. We can't stay here long," Jackson warned. "Once they realize we're not in the immediate vicinity of the crash, they'll widen their search." Stanley moved to a bookshelf, sliding it aside to reveal a hidden safe. "I've been preparing for this day for 20 years. He entered the combination, swinging the heavy door open. "Everything you need is here. Bank records proving the fraudulent loans, property transfers to Greenfield Development, offshore account numbers." "You've had evidence against Richard all this time?" Emma asked, incredulous. "Evidence of financial crimes, yes, but nothing that would connect him to Elizabeth's death." Stanley's face tightened with old pain. "Or your husband's?" "Until now." Jackson produced the documents they'd salvaged from the ranch. Thomas documented everything, and he recorded his confrontation with Richard. Stanley examined the evidence with professional precision. "This is enough to bring in federal authorities. Financial crimes, fraud, conspiracy, and with the break line evidence, murder charges." "So we call the FBI," Emma said. "Not from here," Stanley cautioned. "Cell signals can be traced. We need to reach my contact in Denver directly." "That's a 3-hour drive," Jackson pointed out, finishing with Emma's ankle. "And Richard's men are between us and the main road." Stanley moved to a closet, retrieving a shotgun and boxes of ammunition. "There's another way out, an old logging road that connects to County Highway 7. My Jeep is parked in the shed out back." "They'll be watching all the roads by now," Emma said. "Not all of them." Stanley's eyes glinted with determination. "The old mining tunnel that runs under Cripple Ridge comes out near the highway. The entrance is about half a mile from here." Jackson eyed Emma's bandaged ankle. "Can you walk on that?" She tested it, gritting her teeth against the pain. "If it means putting Richard Caldwell behind bars for killing my husband, I could run a marathon." "That's the spirit," Stanley approved, gathering documents into a waterproof bag. "We leave. In 10 minutes, the storm that's coming will help cover our tracks." Outside, thunder rumbled as if on cue, the promise of rain heavy in the air. Emma closed her eyes briefly, drawing strength from the mental image of Thomas. He'd fought to expose Richard's crimes and paid with his life. She wouldn't let his death be in vain. "Ready?" Jackson asked softly, offering his arm for support. Emma accepted his help, determination hardening her resolve, ready to end this once and for all. They slipped out the back door into the gathering storm, Emma leaning heavily on Jackson, while Stanley led the way with a powerful flashlight. The forest was alive with sounds, branches creaking in the wind, distant thunder, the soft patter of rain beginning to fall through the canopy. "The tunnel entrance is just beyond that ridge," Stanley whispered, pointing toward a rocky outcropping. They moved as quickly as Emma's injured ankle allowed, Jackson taking most of her weight. Behind them, faint shouts carried on the wind. The search party was widening its perimeter. "They're getting closer," Emma warned. "Almost there," Stanley assured them, climbing over fallen logs with surprising agility for his age. The tunnel entrance loomed before them, a black moor in the hillside partially concealed by overgrowth. Stanley pushed aside tangled vines, revealing the rotting timbers that framed the opening. "It hasn't been used in decades," he explained, "but the support structures were built to last. My grandfather helped construct it." Inside, the air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of earth and decay. Stanley's flashlight illuminated a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. "Stay close," he warned. "It's about half a mile through, with some tight spots where cave-ins have occurred." They moved forward in single file, Stanley leading, Emma in the middle, Jackson bringing up the rear. Water dripped from the ceiling and occasionally small creatures scurried away from their light. "How did you find this place?" Emma asked, partly to distract herself from the claustrophobic surroundings. "Elizabeth showed it to me," Stanley replied softly. "We were teenagers. It was our secret meeting place when her father disapproved of our relationship." The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to crouch. Emma bit back a cry as her injured ankle scraped against a jagged rock. "You okay?" Jackson asked from behind her. "Fine," she managed. "Keep going." They had covered perhaps half the distance when a sound froze them in place, voices echoing from the tunnel entrance. "Tracks lead this way. Are you sure? Who'd go into that death trap?" "Desperate people, that's who. Call the boss." Stanley extinguished his flashlight, plunging them into absolute darkness. "We need to move faster," he whispered. "They'll be right behind us with better lights than mine." In the pitch black, they fumbled forward, feeling their way along the damp walls. Emma's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give away their position. A beam of light stabbed through the darkness far behind them. "I see footprints," the voice carried clearly in the confined space. "They're in here." "Run," Jackson urged, hoisting Emma into his arms once more. "I've got her, Stanley. Lead the way." Stanley reactivated his flashlight, keeping it pointed at the ground to minimize its visibility from behind. They moved as quickly as the treacherous footing allowed, hope building as they glimpsed a faint glow of natural light ahead. The exit was partially collapsed, leaving only a narrow opening. Stanley squeezed through first, turning to help Emma. "Richard's waiting at the highway," came an urgent whisper from outside. "One of his men just passed on an ATV, heading toward the exit." Emma froze, recognizing the new voice. "That's Sheriff Dawson!" Stanley pulled her through the opening. "He's with us. I called him before you arrived at the cabin." Outside, the storm had intensified, rain falling in sheets. Sheriff Dawson crouched behind a boulder, rifle at the ready. "You're a sight for sore eyes," he told Emma, helping her to cover. "Where's Wade?" "Right behind me," she said, turning back toward the tunnel opening just as a shot rang out from inside. "Jackson!" Emma lunged toward the tunnel entrance as another shot echoed from within. Sheriff Dawson pulled her back, just as a bullet splintered the rock beside them. "Stay down!" Dawson pushed her behind cover, raising his rifle. Rain pelted them, turning the ground to mud as they crouched in tense silence. A groan emanated from the tunnel, followed by scuffling sounds. Jackson emerged backwards, dragging an unconscious man by his collar. Blood stained Jackson's sleeve, but he seemed more angry than hurt. "One of Richard's hired guns," he grunted, dropping the man unceremoniously. "Got a lucky shot off. Grazed my arm." Stanley quickly bound Jackson's wound with a bandana, while Dawson zip-tied the unconscious man. "There's at least 2 more inside," Jackson warned. "They won't be far behind." "My jeep's hidden 1/4 mile south," Stanley said, "but Richard's watching the highway." Sheriff Dawson checked his ammunition. "I've got my cruiser on the logging road, radio to call for backup, but we need to move now." "My department's compromised," Dawson explained as they hurried through the woods, Emma hobbling between Jackson and Stanley. "Deputy Collins is Richard's cousin. Half my officers take envelopes from him monthly." "Then who can we trust?" Emma asked. "State police. I called Captain Reeves. He's sending a tactical team, but they're 90 minutes out." Lightning flashed, illuminating a clearing ahead, where a patrol car waited, its markings barely visible through the downpour. "We'll take Stanley's evidence to the federal building in Denver," Dawson said, helping Emma into the back seat. "FBI has jurisdiction over the financial crimes. That gets Richard in custody while we build the murder case." "If we make it to Denver," Stanley muttered, glancing nervously at the road ahead. Dawson started the engine. "I know these back roads better than Richard ever will. Grew up hunting them with my grandfather." They pulled onto the narrow dirt track, headlights off, relying on moonlight filtering through breaks in the storm clouds. The cruiser's tires slipped in mud, but found purchase as Dawson expertly navigated the treacherous terrain. Emma pressed, a hand against the window, watching shadows of trees whip past. Somewhere behind them, her home, the last connection to Thomas, lay in ashes. Grief and rage coiled inside her like twin serpents. "Sheriff." Jackson leaned forward from the back seat. "How long have you suspected Richard?" "Years. But suspecting isn't proving." Dawson's weathered face tightened. "When Thomas died, something didn't sit right. The brake lines looked too clean, not like normal wear. But Richard blocked my investigation, called in favors with the county commissioner." "Yet you're helping us now," Emma observed. "Thomas was a good man. Taught my boy to ride when no one else had patience for a kid with learning disabilities." Dawson's voice roughened. "I owe him this, and I'm damn tired of watching Richard Caldwell act like he owns this county." The cruiser crested a hill, revealing the distant glow of highway lights. They'd reached the junction where the logging road connected with County Road 7. "Almost there," Dawson murmured. Headlights suddenly flooded the road ahead. A black SUV, materializing from a concealed position, blocking their path. "Hell!" Dawson slammed the brakes, sending them into a controlled skid that stopped inches from collision. A second vehicle appeared behind them, sealing their escape. "Out! Everyone out!" Jackson reached for his weapon as the SUV doors opened. Richard. Caldwell emerged from the passenger side, illuminated by headlights. He looked nothing like the polished businessman Emma knew, his eyes wild, rain plastering silver hair to his scalp, a hunting rifle gripped in white-knuckled hands. "You disappoint me, Sheriff." Richard's voice carried through the storm. "After all I've done for your family, drop the weapon, Richard." Dawson stepped from the cruiser, badge glinting in the headlights. "It's over." "Over?" Richard laughed, the sound brittle as breaking glass. "I've built everything in this county. The hospital wing with my name on it, the jobs, the tax revenue. You think anyone will believe your accusations?" Emma slipped from the car, Jackson's steadying hand at her elbow. The cold rain numbed her throbbing ankle as she faced her father-in-law. "Thomas believed them," she said, loud enough to carry. That's why you killed him. Something ugly twisted Richard's features. My son was weak, just like his mother, sentimental about land that should be leveraged for maximum profit. You killed them both. Stanley emerged from the cruiser, the waterproof, evidence bag clutched to his chest. Elizabeth knew you were embezzling from the family trust. She confronted you just like Thomas did. Shut up! Richard raised his rifle. You loved her? You couldn't protect her then, and you can't now. Federal agents are already on their way, Dawson bluffed, edging sideways to shield the others. Put the gun down before this gets worse. It's already worse. Richard's smile chilled Emma's blood. You really think I'd come alone? Movement rippled through the trees surrounding them. Men with rifles materialized from the darkness. 6, no, 8 armed figures. Your move, Sheriff. Richard's confidence returned, water streaming down his face like tears he'd never shed. How many people are you willing to sacrifice for a dead man's crusade? Jackson shifted, positioning himself beside Emma. Those men are hired guns, he whispered. Private security from Denver. They don't have the stomach for murder. Richard does, Emma whispered back. He killed his own son. Dawson assessed their odds, jaw working. Nobody needs to die tonight, Richard. I agree. Richard gestured with his rifle. Give me the evidence, all of it. You walk away, keep your jobs, your lives. We forget this unpleasantness. Like you. Forgot Thomas? Emma's voice cut through the rain. Like you forgot your wife? How many people have you buried to build your empire, Richard? For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered in Richard's eyes. A glimpse of something almost human. Thunder cracked overhead, and in that instant, Jackson moved. His hand slipped something cold and metal into Emma's palm. Car keys. When it starts, run for the cruiser, he breathed against her ear. Before she could respond, Jackson had his weapon drawn. Federal agent, everyone down. Confusion erupted. Richard's men hesitated, unsure who to target as Jackson's authoritative command echoed through the clearing. Dawson seized the moment, diving for cover behind the cruiser's engine block, firing 2 warning shots skyward. Last chance, Richard, the sheriff shouted. Surrender now. Instead, Richard fired wildly, the shot going wide as Stanley tackled him from behind. The banker might have been older, softer, but decades of rage lent him strength as he grappled with his former rival. Emma limped toward the cruiser as chaos erupted around her. Hired guns fired at shadows, more interested in self-preservation than killing. Jackson provided covering fire, while Dawson circled toward the struggling figures of Richard and Stanley. She reached the driver's door, fumbling with the keys Jackson had given her. The engine roared to life just as she heard a scream of pain. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she saw Stanley stumbling backward, clutching his chest. Richard stood triumphant, rifle raised for a killing shot. 2 quick reports cracked through. The night, not from Richard's weapon, but from Dawson's service pistol. Richard jerked, rifle slipping from nerveless fingers as he crumpled to the mud. Go! Jackson shouted, rushing toward Stanley's fallen form. Get to the highway! Bring help! Emma hesitated only a second before jamming the cruiser into reverse. Tires spinning in mud before finding purchase. She executed a quick 3-point turn, heart hammering against her ribs as bullets pinged against metal. The cruiser fishtailed onto the county road, leaving chaos behind. Through the rearview mirror, she glimpsed Jackson dragging Stanley toward cover, while Dawson provided suppressing fire. She floored the accelerator, the storm and her tears blurring the road ahead. State Trooper Marcus Jenkins was midway through. His graveyard shift when the mud-splattered sheriff's cruiser careened onto Highway 40, nearly colliding with his patrol vehicle. Holy! He hit the brakes, watching in disbelief as the cruiser skidded to a stop across both lanes. A woman emerged, soaked, limping, wild-eyed, waving her arms frantically. "Officer, please!" she screamed over the storm. "There's been a shooting!" "Sheriff Dawson needs backup." 20 minutes later, Highway 40 blazed with emergency lights as state police tactical units deployed into the forest. Emma sat wrapped in a blanket inside Trooper Jenkins' vehicle, clutching a satellite phone. "Agent Prescott, Denver Field Office," a crisp voice answered. "This is Emma Caldwell," she began, then faltered. "Where to start? How to compress the nightmare into coherent sentences? Mrs. Caldwell." The agent's tone changed. "We've been expecting your call." Emma blinked in confusion. "You have?" "Marshal Jackson Wade has been working with our office for 14 months on the Greenfield development investigation. He uploaded digital evidence to our secure server an hour ago." Relief weakened her knees. "Jackson's alive. He's our undercover asset, ma'am. Is he with you now?" "No, he's—" A tap on the window interrupted her. Jackson stood there, rainwater streaming from his battered form. Behind him, paramedics loaded a stretcher into an ambulance. Stanley, alive but badly wounded. Sheriff Dawson spoke with the tactical team commander, pointing toward the forest. Emma dropped the phone, threw open the door, and nearly collapsed into Jackson's arms. "Richard?" she asked against his shoulder. "In custody. 2 gunshot wounds, neither fatal." Jackson's arms tightened around her. "It's over, Emma. Really over." Dawn broke over the mountains as Emma sat beside Stanley Weber's hospital bed. The IG banker drifted in and out of consciousness, tubes and monitors, tracking his tenuous hold on life. The bullet missed his heart by centimeters, the surgeon had explained. "He's stable, but the next 24 hours are critical." Jackson entered quietly, carrying 2 coffees. He'd exchanged his mud-caked clothes for clean jeans and a button-down shirt that made him look more like an accountant than the hardened investigator she'd come to know. "How is he?" Jackson handed her a steaming cup. "Fighting." Emma sighed. "The nurse said he was asking for Elizabeth earlier." Jackson nodded, settling into the chair beside her. "The FBI has frozen all of Richard's assets. They found the offshore accounts Thomas documented, plus 3 more. Over $30 million hidden away. And the ranch? Insurance investigators are already ruling the fire as arson. Once Richard's convicted, the civil settlement should more than cover rebuilding." Emma's throat tightened. "The house can be rebuilt. The memories are still yours," Jackson finished gently. "No one can burn those away." She studied him over her coffee cup. "What happens now? With you?" "Reassignment, probably. The Bureau likes to move undercover agents after their cover's blown." A smile touched his lips. "Though I've been thinking about requesting extended leave, this case took a lot out of me." "I can imagine. Besides," he continued carefully, "someone should stick around to make sure the Caldwell Ranch gets rebuilt properly. Those contractors will try to cut corners if no one's watching." Warmth that had nothing to do with coffee spread through Emma's chest. "Are you offering to supervise my construction project, Marshal Wade?" "Among other things." His eyes held possibilities neither of them were ready to name. A soft knock drew their attention. Sheriff Dawson stood in the doorway, hat in hands. "They found it," he said simply. "Thomas's original files. Richard had them in a hidden safe at his hunting lodge. Everything. The evidence Thomas collected, the original loan documents, even—" He hesitated. "Even what?" Emma asked. "A letter. For you. Thomas must have written it the day before he died." Dawson crossed the room, placing a sealed envelope in her trembling hands. The handwriting, so achingly familiar, blurred through her tears. "I'll give you some privacy," Jackson said, rising. "No." Emma caught his hand. "Stay, please." She broke the seal, unfolding the single page inside. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I pray it hasn't, that I'll tear this letter up tomorrow and tell you everything face to face, but I can't take that chance. I've discovered something terrible about my father. Fraud, corruption, possibly worse. The evidence is in the floor, safe beneath my desk. The combination is our anniversary. Whatever happens, know that the ranch is yours. I've filed paperwork with a lawyer in Denver, ensuring the property passes directly to you, bypassing the family. Trust. My father can't touch it, though he'll try. I love you more than words can express. You gave meaning to my life beyond this land, these cattle. You taught me that real wealth isn't measured in acres or dollars. If I don't come home tomorrow, fight for what's ours, and when the fight is over, live the life we dreamed of. That's all I've ever wanted for you. Forever yours, Thomas. Emma pressed the letter to her heart, tears flowing freely now. Jackson's hand settled on her shoulder, a steady anchor in the storm of grief and vindication. Outside the window, sunlight broke through clouds, painting the mountains gold. Somewhere beyond the horizon lay the scorched remains of Willow Creek Ranch, and the promise of rebuilding. Not just structures, but a life. The life Thomas had wanted for her. "I'd like to see the property today," she said finally, wiping her eyes. "What's left of it?" Jackson nodded. "I'll drive you whenever you're ready." She glanced at Stanley's sleeping form, then back to Thomas's letter. "I'm ready now." The hills of Willow Creek Ranch unfurled before them, emerald pastures scarred by tire tracks where emergency vehicles had converged. As Jackson's truck crested the final rise, Emma steeled herself for the devastation ahead. The charred skeleton of the ranch house stood stark against the blue sky, blackened beams jutting like broken bones. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze, marking where arson investigators had already begun their work. "You don't have to do this today," Jackson said softly as he parked. "Yes, I do." Emma stepped from the truck, inhaling the acrid scent of wet ash and scorched timber. This wasn't just a crime scene, it was Thomas's legacy, her home. They approached slowly, Emma pausing before the porch steps that had somehow survived the blaze. Through the burned-out doorway, she glimpsed the remains of their life together. A melted picture frame, the twisted metal of the kitchen table, the grandfather clock reduced to a charcoal husk. "The safe," she said suddenly. Thomas mentioned a floor safe in his letter, in his office. Jackson studied the structure's remains. If it's a proper safe, it might have survived the fire. They picked their way carefully through debris, Emma fighting vertigo as memories overlaid the destruction. Thomas laughing in the kitchen doorway, their first Christmas decorating the living room, quiet evenings on the porch watching sunset. Paint the distant mountains. Thomas's office had suffered less damage than other rooms, protected by thick adobe walls. The antique desk was partially burned, but the floor beneath, there. Emma pointed to a rectangular outline in the concrete foundation, barely visible beneath ash and debris. Together they cleared the area, revealing a metal safe door with a combination dial blistered by heat but intact. Emma knelt, fingers trembling as she entered their wedding date, 7/14/17. A click and the door swung open. Inside lay a fireproof document box. She lifted it with reverence, realizing it contained the last pieces of Thomas she would ever discover. "Let's take it outside," Jackson suggested gently. "Better light." They settled on the porch steps, the box between them. Emma took a deep breath and raised the lid. Inside were neatly labeled folders, property deeds, insurance policies, bank statements, all the documentation Thomas had meticulously maintained. But beneath those practical papers lay personal treasures, a velvet jewelry box containing his grandmother's sapphire necklace, photographs she'd never seen of Thomas as a child, and a leather-bound journal. Emma opened the journal with trembling fingers. Thomas's handwriting filled the pages, not ranch accounts or business plans, but entries about their life together. May 12th. Emma planted wildflowers along the east fence today. Said the cattle deserved something pretty to look at. God, I love the way her mind works. Tears blurred the words as Emma flipped through the pages, discovering Thomas's private thoughts, his hopes for their future. The depth of love he'd sometimes struggled to express aloud. The final entry was dated the day before his death. I've made arrangements with Jim Harvey in Denver to transfer ownership of Willow Creek directly to Emma. Dad will be furious, but I won't let him take this from her. From us. Tomorrow, I'm confronting him with everything I've found. I hope I'm wrong about how far he'll go to protect his secrets, but I can't ignore the evidence anymore. Emma deserves the truth. This land deserves better, and I have to be the one to end it. He knew, Emma whispered. He suspected Richard might, but he confronted him anyway. He was protecting you, Jackson said quietly, and everything you both loved. Emma closed the journal, pressing it to her heart. He always said this land was in his blood. Now it's in mine, too. A truck appeared on the drive, dust billowing behind it. FBI agents, Emma guessed, here to collect evidence. Her private moment. With Thomas's legacy was ending. I need to see the barn, she said suddenly, before they cordon everything off. Jackson helped her up, and they crossed the yard to the large structure that had escaped the fire. Inside, the familiar scents of hay and leather greeted her. Thomas's tools hung in precise order on the wall, his saddle draped over the rack where he'd left it that final morning. He was teaching me to ride, Emma said, running her fingers over the tooled leather. I was city-raised. Couldn't tell a stirrup from a bridle when we met. And now I can saddle my own horse, she managed to smile, but I'll never be the rider he was. A soft nickering drew her attention to the stalls. 3 horses watched them curiously. Domino, Thomas's, Black Stallion, Penny, her gentler mare, and Starfire, the colt Thomas had been training before his death. The hands must have released them during the fire. Relief flooded her voice. At least they're safe. Your foreman called the sheriff's office this morning, Jackson told her. He and the ranch hands have been staying at the bunkhouse. They've been caring for the livestock. Miguel's still here. Hope flickered in her chest. I assumed they'd all left after Richard told them you were selling. Apparently not. Miguel said, and I quote, "We work for Mrs. Caldwell now, not that snake Richard." Fresh tears sprang to Emma's eyes. But these weren't entirely born of grief. Something was taking root in the ashes of her old life. Something that felt like possibility. Emma. Jackson's voice pulled her from her thoughts. There's something else you should know. His tone made her turn. What is it? The FBI finished their preliminary financial investigation. The $200,000 from the fraudulent loan. It was just the beginning. Richard was siphoning money from the Caldwell family trust for years, money that should have come to Thomas. When he turned 30, how much? Nearly $3 million. With the civil penalties and criminal asset seizure, it will all revert to you as Thomas's heir. Emma sank onto a hay bale, the implications washing over her. Not just enough to rebuild the house, but to modernize the entire ranch operation. To realize the dreams she and Thomas had shared during late-night planning sessions, sustainable practices, expanded breeding program, even the wildlife conservation project he'd been passionate about. I don't know the first thing about running a cattle operation, she confessed, but you know people who do. Jackson settled beside her. Miguel, the other hands. They're loyal to this place, to what Thomas stood for. And you? The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. Where do you fit in all this, now that the case is closed? Jackson studied his hands, calloused from more than just undercover work. I was ranch-raised in Montana before joining the Marshals. Worked cattle every summer through college. You never mentioned that. Wasn't relevant to the investigation. His eyes met hers. But it might be relevant now, if you're looking for someone who understands both worlds, law enforcement and ranching. The air between them shifted, possibilities unfolding, like the valley spread before the ranch house. I'm not ready, Emma said honestly, for whatever this is. Thomas has only been gone 6 months, and finding out it was murder instead of an accident. I'm not asking for anything, Emma. Jackson's voice was gentle, just offering to help. Rebuild what Richard tried to destroy. So the rest, he shrugged. The rest can wait as long as it needs to. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the soft sounds of horses and the distant call of a red-tailed hawk. I should check on Stanley, Emma said finally, and there'll be statements to give, paperwork to file. Jackson nodded, standing to offer her his hand. One step at a time. Outside, FBI agents were photographing the burned structure while others searched the surrounding area for evidence. Life moving forward, justice in process. Emma paused at the truck, looking back at the ruined house and the vast, beautiful land surrounding it. Thomas had loved this place enough to die protecting it. She would honor that by bringing it back to life. I'm ready, she told Jackson, sliding into the passenger seat. As they drove away, Emma didn't see devastation in her rearview mirror, but promise. Willow Creek Ranch would rise again. Different, perhaps, shaped by loss and hard-won wisdom, but rooted in the legacy Thomas had entrusted to her, and she wouldn't face that journey alone. 2 months later, Emma stood on the newly built porch, watching the sun sink behind distant mountains. Construction crews had worked miracles, the ranch house rising from ashes in record time. It wasn't identical to what had been lost. She'd made changes, putting her own stamp on the design while honoring Thomas's vision. "Coffee's ready!" Jackson called from inside. She smiled, taking a final glance at workers securing tarps over lumber for the barn expansion before heading indoors. The kitchen gleamed with new appliances, but she'd insisted on recreating the heart of their old home, the massive oak table where ranch hands gathered for meals, the stone fireplace where she and Thomas had spent winter evenings. Jackson handed her a steaming mug, their fingers brushing in a now familiar gesture that sparked warmth beyond the coffee's heat. "Miguel says the new irrigation system is already showing results in the south pasture," he reported, leaning against the counter. "And the veterinarian cleared the pregnant heifers. Should be a good calving season." Thomas would be proud. Emma sipped her coffee, savoring both the flavor and the moment. "I received a letter from Stanley today. His rehabilitation is going well. Doctors say he'll make a full recovery." "Good. The prosecutor needs his testimony for Richard's trial." The mention of her father-in-law darkened Emma's mood momentarily. Richard Caldwell sat in federal custody, denied bail due to flight risk, facing charges that would keep him imprisoned for decades. "Any update on the resort development that Richard was positioning for?" she asked. Jackson shook his head. "State Commission tabled it indefinitely after the scandal broke. Too much negative publicity. I've been thinking about that land." Emma set down her mug. "All those properties Richard acquired through fraud, they'll eventually be sold off by the government, right? Most likely. Why? What if we formed a conservation trust? Use some of the settlement money to preserve that corridor along the lake? Thomas always talked about protecting the watershed." Jackson studied her with undisguised admiration. "That's actually brilliant. A memorial that undoes everything Richard tried to accomplish. Not just a memorial," Emma corrected, "a beginning. Thomas had bigger dreams for this land than just cattle. He wanted it to be sustainable, to balance ranching with conservation." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sheriff Dawson stood on the porch, hat in hand. "Evening, Emma." "Jackson." He nodded to them both. "Sorry to intrude, but I thought you'd want to hear this directly from me." Emma tensed. "What is it?" "They've set Richard's trial date, January 15th. The prosecutor says with the evidence we have, it's practically open and shut." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you for letting me know." Dawson shifted uncomfortably. "There's more." Richard's attorney approached the DA about a plea deal. "No," Emma said firmly. "After what he did to Thomas, to Stanley's Elizabeth, he doesn't deserve leniency." The DA agrees. Dawson's weathered face broke into a rare smile, turned them down flat. Richard's going to face a jury for everything he's done. After Dawson left, Emma returned to the porch, breathing in the evening air scented with pine and promise. Jackson joined her, respecting her need for silence as emotions rolled through her. "Winter's coming," she said finally, watching clouds build over the mountains. "Thomas always said you don't really know a ranch until you've seen it through all. 4 seasons. First winter's always the hardest," Jackson agreed. "But you've got good people around you, strong foundations." Emma turned to face him, really seeing the man who had helped her reclaim her life. No longer the mysterious stranger who'd appeared on her doorstep, but someone who'd become essential to her world. "I'm not ready to let go of Thomas," she said. "Honestly, I'm not sure I ever will be completely. You don't have to." Jackson's voice was steady. "What we build doesn't erase what came before. It grows from it." She thought of the new saplings planted where old trees had stood, the repaired fences following paths Thomas had established, the ranch ledgers where her handwriting now continued. The story his had begun. "Stay," she said simply, "not just through winter. Stay and help me build something that honors what was lost without being trapped by it." Jackson's hand found hers, warm and certain. "I already told the marshals I'm retiring." Above them, the first stars appeared in the deepening blue. Somewhere, in the distance, cattle lowed as ranch hands guided them toward evening pastures. The rhythm of Willow Creek continued, altered but unbroken. Emma leaned against the porch railing, Jackson beside her, both watching darkness soften the ranch's scars while highlighting its beauty. The future stretched before them, not the one she'd planned with Thomas, but one that carried his legacy forward in unexpected ways. "Welcome home," she whispered, and whether the words were for Thomas's memory, for Jackson, or for herself finally finding peace, Emma couldn't say. Perhaps it was for all three, woven together like the land, the loss and the love that had brought her to this moment. Behind them, lights glowed from the rebuilt ranch house, casting warm rectangles onto the porch. Ahead, Willow Creek Ranch, spread in all directions, resilient and enduring despite those who had tried to destroy it, just like its owner. January arrived with bitter winds and the weight of testimony. Emma sat rigid in the courtroom's hard oak bench, watching Richard Caldwell's shoulders hunch beneath his prison jumpsuit, a jarring contrast to the tailored suits he'd worn while dismantling lives. "You don't have to be here every day," Jackson whispered, his thigh warm against hers in the crowded gallery. "Yes, I do." Her eyes never left Richard's back. For Thomas, the prosecutor methodically constructed the case. Financial. Records projected on screens, technical jargon about wire transfers and shell corporations, Stanley Weber's testimony delivered from a wheelchair, his voice frail but determined as he detailed decades of Richard's machinations. Emma testified on the third day, feeling Thomas's presence beside her as she recounted the foreclosure notice, the mysterious loan, the fire that had consumed her home. "And when did you learn your husband's death wasn't an accident?" the prosecutor asked. Emma's gaze locked with Richard's across the courtroom. "When Mr. Wade showed me evidence that Thomas's brake lines had been cut." For a fleeting second, something like pride flashed in Richard's eyes. Not remorse, but a grudging respect that she'd uncovered his crimes. The expression made her blood run cold. On the trial's 5th day, a mechanical engineer testified about Thomas's truck, showing jurors metal fragments with telltale tool marks where the brake lines had been deliberately severed. "Could this damage have occurred accidentally?" the prosecutor asked. "Impossible," the engineer stated flatly. "This was precision work, requiring specific tools and knowledge." Richard's attorney objected repeatedly, grasping at technicalities, that the judge calmly overruled. The case was airtight, the evidence overwhelming. Yet watching her father-in-law's impassive face, Emma wondered if imprisonment would be punishment enough for a man who viewed emotional connections as weaknesses to exploit. Richard had murdered his own son for a profit margin. What prison could contain such calculated malevolence? During a recess, she escaped to a quiet hallway, pressing her forehead against cool marble as courtroom tension ebbed from her shoulders. "He's going away for life," Jackson's voice broke her solitude. "The jury's expressions say it all." "It doesn't bring Thomas back," she turned to face him, "or Stanley's Elizabeth. All that suffering just so Richard could build a real estate empire." Jackson leaned against the wall beside her. "The prosecutor asked if you'd make a victim impact statement before sentencing." Emma had prepared for this, rehearsed words that might penetrate Richard's armor. Now she wondered if any speech could reach a man who'd sacrificed his family for financial gain. "I'll do it," she said finally. "Not for Richard's benefit, but for the record, so people remember Thomas as more than just another victim." When they returned to the courtroom, something had changed. Richard conferred urgently with his attorney, gesturing sharply before the lawyer approached the bench. The judge called both counsels for a private discussion. "What's happening?" Emma whispered. Jackson frowned. "Richard might be offering information." "Information about what?" The answer came minutes later when the judge addressed the court. "The defendant has indicated he possesses knowledge about additional financial crimes involving prominent citizens of Riverdale County. We'll recess until tomorrow while the prosecution evaluates this development." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as Emma and Jackson pushed toward their truck. "Mrs. Caldwell, is it true Richard implicated Sheriff Dawson in the financial fraud?" Emma froze. "What? No, that's absurd." "Sources say Richard claims Dawson was paid to ignore evidence in your husband's death investigation." Jackson muscled between Emma and the reporters. "No comment. The sheriff has been instrumental in bringing Richard Caldwell to justice." They escaped to the truck, Emma's mind reeling. "Richard's trying to destroy everyone who testified against him, isn't he?" "Classic scorched earth tactic," Jackson confirmed grimly. "Drag everyone down with him." Will the prosecution believe him? They'll investigate any credible claims. But Dawson's record is clean. Emma's phone rang. Miguel, the ranch foreman. "Senora Caldwell, we have trouble. Men came asking questions, taking photographs of the property. They say they represent Riverdale County tax assessor." "That's unusual timing," she said after hearing the details. "Did they have identification?" "See, but something felt wrong. They were too interested in the new construction, asking about permits. We'll head back now," Emma told him. "Don't let anyone on the property without me present." Jackson navigated through town, past the courthouse where reporters now surrounded. "Sheriff Dawson, Richard's desperate," he observed. "He knows he's lost, so he's trying to create enough chaos to negotiate a better deal. By accusing Dawson of corruption. Nobody will believe that. It's not about belief, it's about delay. Every day the trial drags on gives Richard more opportunity to manipulate the system." They crested the final hill to Willow Creek Ranch as sunset painted the snowdrifts in amber and rose. Two unfamiliar vehicles were parked at the gate, a county assessor's van and a black SUV with tinted windows. "Stay in the truck," Jackson instructed, reaching beneath his seat for his sidearm. "Like hell," Emma countered, already opening her door. This was her land, her fight. 3 men stood arguing with Miguel near the gate, 2 in county uniforms, the third in an expensive suit that marked him as an outsider. "Mrs. Caldwell." The suited man stepped forward, extending a business card. "Victor Kramer, representing Lakeview Development Corporation. I understand you've acquired several properties formerly held by Greenfield Development." Emma didn't take the card. "I haven't acquired anything. Those properties are subject to criminal asset forfeiture. Actually, several have been released from federal hold. We've purchased them at auction." Kramer's smile revealed 2 perfect teeth. "We're prepared to make a generous offer for Willow Creek as well. Given your husband's unfortunate passing, perhaps you'd prefer city living again." The casual mention of Thomas ignited something fierce in Emma's chest. This ranch isn't for sale. Not today, not ever. Everyone has a price, Mrs. Caldwell. Kramer's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. The resort development is proceeding with or without your cooperation. Wouldn't you rather benefit financially than fight progress? Lakeview Development, Jackson interjected. Wasn't your CEO indicted last year for environmental violations? Kramer's smile faltered. Those charges were dismissed after key evidence mysteriously disappeared, Jackson finished. Interesting coincidence. My offer stands until Friday. Kramer retreated toward the SUV. After that, accessing county water rights becomes complicated for non-participating landowners. Emma waited until the vehicles disappeared down the road before turning to Jackson. Richard's not even sentenced, and already the vultures are circling. This wasn't opportunistic, Jackson said. Examining tire tracks in the snow, those county assessors were laying groundwork for legal challenges. Kramer knew exactly when to approach you, while you're emotionally drained from the trial. How did they know about the properties being released from federal hold? That information isn't public yet. Jackson's expression darkened. Someone inside. The prosecutor's office is leaking information. Richard's reach is longer than we thought. His money's reach, Jackson corrected. He may be finished, but his fortune can still buy trouble. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She paced the ranch house, each creak and settle of the new construction amplifying her unease. The encounter with Kramer had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, not because of his threats, but because his presence proved Richard's legacy of corruption continued even as the man himself faced justice. She found herself in Thomas's office, now rebuilt with the same dimensions, but filled with her own touches. Photographs of the ranch through seasons, local artwork, and a display case containing items salvaged from the fire. Thomas's pocket watch, his favorite coffee mug, miraculously intact, the corner of their wedding photo. Emma traced the carved edge of his desk, a replica of the one lost in the fire, crafted by a local woodworker who'd known Thomas since childhood. The ranch's financial records lay open, showing figures for the coming quarter. Feed costs, equipment maintenance, breeding program expansion. All solvent, all moving forward despite Richard's attempts to destroy everything. A soft knock broke her reverie. Jackson stood in the doorway, rumpled from sleep, concern etching his features. Thought I heard you moving around. He leaned against the jamb. Court reconvenes at 9. I can't let them win, she said instead of acknowledging his implied question. About why she was awake at 3 a.m. Not Richard, not Kramer, not whoever they're working with. You won't. Sources say Richard claims Dawson was paid to ignore evidence in your husband's death investigation. Jackson muscled between Emma and the reporters. No comment. The sheriff has been instrumental in bringing Richard Caldwell to justice. They escaped to the truck, Emma's mind reeling. Richard's trying to destroy everyone who testified against him, isn't he? Classic scorched earth tactic, Jackson confirmed grimly. Drag everyone down with him. Will the prosecution believe him? They'll investigate any credible claims. But Dawson's record is clean. Emma's phone rang. Miguel, the ranch foreman. Senora Caldwell, we have trouble. Men came asking questions, taking photographs of the property. They say they represent Riverdale County tax assessor. That's unusual timing, she said after hearing the details. Did they have identification? See, but something felt wrong. They were too interested in the new construction, asking about permits. We'll head back now, Emma told him. Don't let anyone on the property without me present. Jackson navigated through town, past the courthouse where reporters now surrounded. Sheriff Dawson. Richard's desperate, he observed. He knows he's lost, so he's trying to create enough chaos to negotiate a better deal. By accusing Dawson of corruption. Nobody will believe that. It's not about belief, it's about delay. Every day the trial drags on gives Richard more opportunity to manipulate the system. They crested the final hill to Willow Creek Ranch as sunset painted the snowdrifts in amber and rose. Two unfamiliar vehicles were parked at the gate, a county assessor's van and a black SUV with tinted windows. "Stay in the truck," Jackson instructed, reaching beneath his seat for his sidearm. "Like hell," Emma countered, already opening her door. This was her land, her fight. 3 men stood arguing with Miguel near the gate, 2 in county uniforms, the third in an expensive suit that marked him as an outsider. "Mrs. Caldwell." The suited man stepped forward, extending a business card. "Victor Kramer, representing Lakeview Development Corporation. I understand you've acquired several properties formerly held by Greenfield Development." Emma didn't take the card. "I haven't acquired anything. Those properties are subject to criminal asset forfeiture. Actually, several have been released from federal hold. We've purchased them at auction." Kramer's smile revealed 2 perfect teeth. "We're prepared to make a generous offer for Willow Creek as well. Given your husband's unfortunate passing, perhaps you'd prefer city living again." The casual mention of Thomas ignited something fierce in Emma's chest. "This ranch isn't for sale. Not today, not ever." "Everyone has a price, Mrs. Caldwell." Kramer's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "The resort development is proceeding with or without your cooperation. Wouldn't you rather benefit financially than fight progress?" "Lakeview Development," Jackson interjected. "Wasn't your CEO indicted last year for environmental violations?" Kramer's smile faltered. "Those charges were dismissed after key evidence mysteriously disappeared," Jackson finished. "Interesting coincidence. My offer stands until Friday." Kramer retreated toward the SUV. "After that, accessing county water rights becomes complicated for non-participating landowners." Emma waited until the vehicles disappeared down the road before turning to Jackson. "Richard's not even sentenced, and already the vultures are circling." "This wasn't opportunistic," Jackson said. "Examining tire tracks in the snow, those county assessors were laying groundwork for legal challenges. Kramer knew exactly when to approach you, while you're emotionally drained from the trial. How did they know about the properties being released from federal hold? That information isn't public yet." Jackson's expression darkened. "Someone inside. The prosecutor's office is leaking information. Richard's reach is longer than we thought." "His money's reach," Jackson corrected. "He may be finished, but his fortune can still buy trouble." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She paced the ranch house, each creak and settle of the new construction amplifying her unease. The encounter with Kramer had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, not because of his threats, but because his presence proved Richard's legacy of corruption continued even as the man himself faced justice. She found herself in Thomas's office, now rebuilt with the same dimensions but filled with her own touches. Photographs of the ranch through seasons, local artwork, and a display case containing items salvaged from the fire. Thomas's pocket watch, his favorite coffee mug, miraculously intact, the corner of their wedding photo. Emma traced the carved edge of his desk, a replica of the one lost in the fire, crafted by a local woodworker who'd known Thomas since childhood. The ranch's financial records lay open, showing figures for the coming quarter. Feed costs, equipment maintenance, breeding program expansion, all solvent, all moving forward despite Richard's attempts to destroy everything. A soft knock broke her reverie. Jackson stood in the doorway, rumpled from sleep, concern etching his features. "Thought I heard you moving around." He leaned against the jamb. "Court reconvenes at 9. "I can't let them win," she said instead of acknowledging his implied question. About why she was awake at 3 a.m. Not Richard, not Kramer, not whoever they're working with. "You won't." "The Conservation Trust we discussed. I want to expedite it. Lock up as much of that lakefront property as possible before developers can piece it together again." Jackson crossed to her desk, studying the ranch ledgers. That's a major financial commitment, Emma, even with the settlement money. I know. She met his gaze directly. But it's what Thomas would have done, what he died trying to do. The unspoken question hung between them. Was she doing this for Thomas or for herself? 6 months ago, the answer would have been clear. Now, Thomas wanted to protect the watershed, she continued softly. But I'm doing this because I've grown to love this land too, not just as his legacy, but as my home. Jackson's hand covered hers on the ledger, warm and calloused. Then we'll make it happen, first thing after the verdict. If there is a verdict. Emma sighed. Richard's delaying tactics won't work, Jackson assured her. The judge sees through them. Despite his confidence, the next day brought only more delays. Richard claimed sudden chest pains during cross-examination, resulting in a medical evaluation and further postponement. His allegations against Sheriff Dawson prompted a separate investigation, tying up key witnesses. By week's end, Emma's patience had frayed to breaking. Outside the courthouse, reporters ambushed her with questions about new rumors, that Thomas had been involved in the financial fraud, that his death had been a suicide disguised as an accident. Richard's playing the press like a fiddle, Jackson muttered as they escaped the media scrum. He's trying to destroy Thomas's reputation since he can't save his own. Emma's voice caught. Making my husband a villain from beyond the grave. They retreated to a small cafe, where the owner, whose daughter Thomas had coached in 4-H competitions, shooed away reporters and brought them coffee. Emma stared into the steaming cup. I can't keep doing this, Jackson. Every day in that courtroom, watching Richard smirk while he tears down everything Thomas stood for. What are you saying? She met his eyes, determination hardening her resolve. I'm saying maybe we need a different approach. That evening, Emma invited Stanley Weber to the ranch for dinner. His recovery had progressed remarkably. Though he still walked with a cane, his mind remained sharp as ever. Richard's strategy is working, Stanley observed after hearing about the trial delays. He's counting on public fatigue and prosecutor frustration to force a plea deal. How do we counter it? Emma asked, pouring after dinner coffee. Stanley exchanged glances with Jackson. There may be another option, one the prosecutor hasn't considered. What option? Civil RICO action, Jackson explained. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act allows for civil penalties against criminal enterprises. Stanley leaned forward. While the criminal case focuses on specific acts, Thomas's murder, the fraudulent loans, a civil RICO case could address the entire pattern of corrupt behavior stretching back decades. Including Elizabeth's death, Emma asked softly. Stanley nodded, pain ghosting across his features. If we can demonstrate a pattern of activity, murder, fraud, coercion, we can freeze all of Richard's remaining assets and seek massive damages. And if Richard tries delaying tactics, in civil court, such tactics can be viewed as contempt, Jackson explained. The burden of proof is lower, preponderance of evidence rather than beyond reasonable doubt. We hire the best RICO attorneys in the country, Stanley continued. Fund it collectively, you, me, other victims of Richard's schemes. Make it a class action that prevents any single person from being targeted for intimidation. Emma considered the strategy, weighing moral justice against practical outcomes. Would this interfere with the criminal prosecution? Actually, it might help, Jackson replied. Civil discovery could uncover evidence useful to the criminal case, and vice versa. Richard would fight with everything he has, Emma warned. Stanley's smile was grim. Let him. Every dollar he spends fighting us is a dollar that won't fund Lakeview development or whatever scheme comes next. After Stanley departed, Emma and Jackson walked the perimeter of the ranch house, snow crunching beneath their boots as moonlight silvered the landscape. You've been quiet, Jackson observed. Having second thoughts? Emma stopped, gazing toward the distant peaks where Willow Creek originated. Not about fighting Richard, about whether I'm doing it for the right reasons. Meaning. Am I pursuing justice for Thomas or vengeance for myself? She turned to face him fully. There's a fine line between honoring his memory and being consumed by it. Jackson considered her words, his breath fogging in the cold night air. Maybe the question isn't about Thomas versus yourself. Maybe it's about the future versus the past. What do you mean? This land will outlast all of us. Thomas, Richard, you, me. Jackson gestured toward the moonlit pastures. The question is, what happens to it? Who controls it? Who protects it? That's bigger than personal vengeance. Emma weighed his perspective, feeling something unlock in her chest, permission to move forward without abandoning what mattered. Then we fight, she decided. Not just for what was taken, but for what could be. Jackson's smile in the moonlight stirred something she'd kept carefully banked since Thomas's death. Not replacement, nothing could replace what she'd lost, but possibility. A future neither defined solely by grief nor erasing the love that came before. I should warn you, she added, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. I'm stubborn. When I commit to something, I noticed. His gloved hand found hers, squeezing gently. It's one of your better qualities. Their breath mingled in the frigid air, a moment suspended between what had been and what might be. Emma thought of Thomas, not with stabbing grief, but with gentle acknowledgement of all he'd taught her about courage and commitment. Looking up at Jackson's face, weathered by life, but softened by understanding, Emma made another choice. This, one not about justice or land or legacy, but about her own heart. She rose on tiptoes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but deepened as his arms encircled her, pulling her close against the winter chill. When they finally parted, Emma rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I'm not sure I'm ready, she whispered. I know. His voice rumbled beneath her ear. We have time. Above them stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human dramas, yet somehow comforting in their constancy. Emma breathed deeply, of the high country air, filling her lungs with possibility. Tomorrow would bring more battles, in courtrooms, in corporate boardrooms, perhaps even on the land itself as development pressures mounted. But tonight, in this moment, she had found something she thought lost forever. Hope. Spring came to Willow Creek in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. Emma stood in the east pasture among purple lupine and golden balsam root, clipboard in hand as she surveyed fence posts marked for replacement. The civil RICO case had transformed the landscape, both legal and literal. With Richard's assets frozen pending resolution, Lakeview Development's grand plans had stalled. Victor Kramer had vanished back to whatever corporate rock he'd crawled from beneath, and Willow Creek Ranch thrived under Emma's increasingly confident management. The conservation easements came through, Jackson announced, approaching from the direction of the ranch house. He waved legal documents triumphantly. 3,000 acres of watershed permanently protected. Emma's smile bloomed as bright as the wildflowers surrounding them. Thomas would be so proud, Stanley called, Jackson continued, falling into step beside her as they walked the fence line. The criminal trial resumes next week. Richard's delays have finally run out. About time. Emma checked another fence post for stability. Has he asked about our engagement yet? Jackson's laugh rolled across the meadow. Only 4 times during our 10-minute conversation. He's worse than Miguel. I caught him sketching wedding arch designs when he was supposed to be ordering feed supplements. The diamond on Emma's left hand caught the spring sunlight as she made notes on her clipboard. They'd become engaged just 3 weeks ago, a decision that felt neither rushed nor delayed, but simply right. Sheriff Dawson wants us to know the investigation into Richard's accusations against him concluded yesterday. Jackson held a barbed wire strand while Emma tested the tension. Complete exoneration as expected. Richard underestimated this. Community's ability to recognize truth from manipulation. Emma secured the wire to a sturdy post, just like he underestimated me. They worked in companionable silence, completing the fence inspection before heading toward the barn where Miguel waited with the spring calving report. 32 healthy calves, the foreman announced proudly. The new bloodlines are showing excellent results. Perfect, Emma approved. And the irrigation project, on schedule for completion before summer heat. As Miguel departed to oversee afternoon chores, Emma leaned against the barn wall, contentment washing over her. Not just for the ranch's recovery, but for her own. "What are you thinking?" Jackson asked, noticing her expression. "That grief isn't linear," she replied honestly. "There are still mornings I reach for Thomas before remembering. Days when I find something of his and can barely breathe through the pain." Jackson nodded, allowing her the space to continue. "But then there are days like today when I feel him in the land, in the work we're doing, and it's not painful. It's like he's part of something continuing." She gestured toward the ranch, extending in all directions. "I'm not stuck in the past anymore, but I'm not abandoning it either." Jackson's arms encircled her waist, pulling her against his solid warmth. "That's how it should be." A truck appeared on the driveway, Stanley's sedan, moving at uncharacteristic speed. They exchanged concerned glances before hurrying to meet him. Stanley emerged, face flushed with either exertion or excitement. "Turn on the news," he urged without preamble. Richards made a full confession. Inside, they clustered around the television as a news anchor detailed the shocking development. Richard Caldwell had provided a complete confession to all charges, including the murders of Elizabeth Caldwell and Thomas Caldwell, in exchange for nothing. Stanley interrupted Emma's question before she could form it. He got nothing in return. No reduced sentence, no special treatment. "That makes no sense," Jackson frowned. "Why would he—" "Terminal diagnosis," Stanley explained grimly. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Doctors give him 3 months at most." Emma sank onto the sofa, emotions colliding like storm fronts. "He's dying, and wants to go out with the spotlight on him one last time," Jackson concluded. The great Richard Caldwell, confessing all sins on his deathbed. "There's more." Stanley perched on the arm of a nearby chair. "He's naming names, business partners, corrupt officials, everyone who helped him build his empire. It's sending shockwaves through half the state's power structure." "Why?" Emma whispered. "After fighting so hard, why confess now?" "Control." Jackson's assessment was immediate. His last act of power, destroying his co-conspirators because they can't retaliate against a dying man. Stanley nodded agreement. Richard always did prefer being the destroyer rather than the destroyed. On screen, a reporter stood outside the courthouse, detailing Richard's confession, which spanned decades of criminal activity and implicated dozens of prominent figures. "He never mentioned remorse," Emma noted. "For Thomas, for Elizabeth, not a single apology." "I don't think Richard knows what remorse feels like," Stanley said softly. "That's what makes him different from us. What's always made him dangerous." They watched as the news cycle churned through reactions, implications, and speculation about what Richard's confession meant for ongoing investigations. "It's really over," Emma realized. "Not the way we expected, but over nonetheless." Jackson's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "Not over. Transformed. Everything Richard tried to destroy is still here, still thriving." Emma looked around the ranch house, at photographs showing Thomas's smile preserved for future generations, at architectural plans for the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center they'd break ground on next month, at the soil samples from the experimental, sustainable grazing program she'd implemented, and at the people beside her, Jackson, with his quiet strength and unflinching support, Stanley with his decades of patient justice-seeking, and herself, no longer just Thomas Caldwell's widow, but Emma Caldwell, rancher, conservationist, and guardian of a legacy larger than any one person. "Yes," she agreed, squeezing Jackson's hand. "We're still here, and we're just getting started." The evening settled around them on the hilltop, stars appearing one by one, like distant guardians, over Willow Creek Ranch. Emma breathed in the scent of sage and pine, savoring this moment of quiet after the day's emotional whirlwind. "You know what Thomas told me once?" she said, watching the last light fade from distant peaks. "That land remembers. Every footstep, every decision. It all becomes part of the story." Jackson nodded, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "He was right. I used to think. He meant it poetically." Emma gestured toward the expanse below, where ranch lights twinkled like earthbound stars. "Now I understand he meant it literally. The consequences of how we treat the land remain long after we're gone." A coyote called from the eastern ridge, its haunting cry echoed by another farther away. "Do you ever regret it?" Jackson asked. "Getting pulled into all this? You could have taken Richard's buyout offer, moved back to the city, started fresh somewhere, without these painful memories." Emma considered the question carefully. Not for a second. Even the worst days fighting Richard were better than abandoning what mattered to Thomas. She turned to face him fully. "What matters to me now?" In the year since Richard's confession and death, Emma had transformed from a widow desperately, clinging to her husband's legacy, into a woman who'd found her own purpose. The ranch had changed too, less a shrine to Thomas's memory, more a living testament to the values they'd shared. 2 weeks until the wedding. Jackson smiled, changing the subject. Having second thoughts about letting Miguel handle the reception. "Menu? After today's event?" "Not at all." She laughed, remembering the foreman's meticulously planned surprise. "Though I'm a bit concerned about his insistence on baking the cake himself. The man raised 5 daughters. I'm guessing he knows his way around a kitchen." They made their way down the hillside, hands linked, following a path worn by countless evening walks. The main house glowed welcoming against the night. No longer just Emma and Thomas's home, but hers and Jackson's too, their shared refuge after long days of ranch work and conservation projects. Inside, Emma kicked off her boots and padded to the kitchen, while Jackson built a fire against the evening chill. The rhythm of their movements had the easy synchronicity of people who'd found their balance together. "Stanley's staying in town tonight," Jackson called from the living room. "Says he'll be back tomorrow to finalize the Scholarship Foundation paperwork." The Elizabeth Caldwell Memorial Scholarship had been Stanley's idea, using a portion of the settlement money to fund education for rural students pursuing agricultural and environmental studies. His way of ensuring Elizabeth's gentle influence continued, just as the Wildlife Center honored Thomas. Emma brought coffee to the sofa, settling beside Jackson as flames cast dancing shadows across the room. On the mantel, photographs told their story. Thomas on his favorite horse, Emma at last year's county fair accepting an Agricultural Innovation Award, Jackson and Emma breaking ground on the Wildlife Center, all 3 of them, Emma, Jackson and Stanley, at the governor's mansion, receiving recognition for the Watershed Protection Initiative. "I got a call from Maria Vasquez today," Emma said, cradling her mug. "She's considering running for county commissioner next term." "Good. The county could use someone with her perspective." Jackson's arms stretched along the back of the sofa, fingers absently playing with Emma's hair. Between her and Dawson, things might actually change around here. They already have. Emma gestured toward the window where, beyond the darkness, Willow Creek Ranch spread in all directions. A year ago, development companies were buying up everything in sight. Now, we're setting the agenda. The fire popped and hissed, a counterpoint to the comfortable silence that followed. Emma's thoughts drifted to the wedding plans, a simple ceremony here at the ranch, close friends and the found family they'd built through shared struggle. Not to replace what she'd had with Thomas, but to honor it by moving forward. "What's that smile about?" Jackson asked, catching her expression. "Just thinking that Thomas would approve of all this. Us, the Conservation Trust, even the ridiculous number of wedding pies Miguel insists on baking because he can't decide on a flavor." Jackson's laugh rumbled deep in his chest. "I think you're right." The telephone's sharp ring broke their reverie. Emma reached for it, wondering who'd call so late. "Mrs. Caldwell." A woman's hesitant voice came through the line. "This is Amanda Thorne. You don't know me, but I was Richard Caldwell's assistant for 15 years. Emma straightened, signaling Jackson with a raised eyebrow. "Yes, Miss Thorne. What can I do for you?" "I've been overseas. Only just heard. About everything that happened." The woman's voice wavered. "There's something you should know, something Richard kept hidden from everyone." "I'm listening." "It's about your husband's accident." The brake lines. A deep breath. "Richard didn't cut them himself. He hired someone, a mechanic from outside the county. I have proof, receipts, messages, details of payment." Emma's fingers tightened on the receiver. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because the man Richard hired is still out there, and because I can't live with this knowledge anymore." Amanda's voice strengthened with resolution. "I want to make a formal statement to the authorities, but I thought you deserved to hear it first." After arranging for Amanda to meet with Sheriff Dawson the following morning, Emma hung up slowly, processing this new information. "Another piece of the puzzle," she told Jackson. "Another person involved in Thomas's death." His expression darkened. "Does it change anything for you?" "Not the outcome," Emma acknowledged, "but maybe the closure. Knowing exactly how it happened, who was involved, it matters." Jackson nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. The ranch had taught them both that details mattered, that foundations needed to be solid, that some questions deserved answers, even when those answers brought pain. The next morning dawned clear and cool. A perfect spring day, as Emma and Jackson drove to the sheriff's office. Amanda Thorne waited outside, a thin, nervous woman with prematurely grey hair and watchful eyes. "I brought everything," she said by way of greeting, clutching a leather portfolio. "All the evidence Richard thought he'd destroyed." Inside, Sheriff Dawson recorded her statement as she detailed Richard's meticulous planning of Thomas's murder, the hired mechanic, the careful timing, the calculated alibi. "His name is Frank Mercer," Amanda said, sliding forward a photograph. "Ex-military, works off the books for people who don't ask questions. Richard used him for other problems before Thomas." "Like Elizabeth Caldwell's riding accident?" Emma asked quietly. Amanda's eyes widened. "You know about that too?" "We suspected, never had proof." The former assistant nodded slowly. "Same method, different time, different details, but the same man behind it." She pushed forward a USB drive. "Bank transfers, text messages Richard thought were deleted, meeting dates. It's all there." As Amanda continued her statement, Emma felt a strange calmness settle over her. Each new revelation should have reopened wounds, but instead brought a sense of completion, the final pieces of a painful puzzle locking into place. "Why now?" Sheriff Dawson asked the question on everyone's mind. "Richard's dead. The civil case is settled." Amanda's hands twisted in her lap. "Because Mercer contacted me last week. He's blackmailing the other people Richard hired him to handle problems for." Her voice dropped. "He said if I didn't pay, he'd implicate me too." "And would that implication be justified?" Jackson asked, his former law enforcement instincts evident. "No," Amanda said firmly. "I knew Richard was ruthless. In business, I helped him cut legal corners, hide assets, pressure people to sell property, but murder. I never knew about that until after Thomas died, when I accidentally saw messages on Richard's phone. Her voice cracked. By then I was trapped, too compromised to come forward, too horrified to stay silent. When Richard was diagnosed with cancer, I took a leave of absence. Couldn't face him anymore. Sheriff Dawson nodded slowly. We'll need you to work with a sketch artist. Provide any details you remember about Mercer's appearance, habits, contacts. I'll do whatever you need. Amanda agreed. I just want this over. Outside, after Amanda had been taken to another room to work with investigators, Emma leaned against the courthouse wall, absorbing the morning's revelations. You okay? Jackson asked. Strangely, yes. Emma watched a hawk circling above the town. Square. It doesn't bring Thomas back, but it feels right to know the whole truth. They'll find Mercer, Jackson assured her. Dawson's good at his job, and with Amanda's evidence, I know. Emma pushed away from the wall, straightening her shoulders. But right now, we have a wedding to finalize and a wildlife center to open. Thomas wouldn't want us to put life on hold while waiting for justice. 3 days later, they received the call. Frank Mercer had been arrested in Colorado, caught as he attempted to blackmail another of Richard's former associates. The evidence from Amanda proved conclusive, and Mercer quickly offered to cooperate in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He's confessed to 5 murders, Sheriff Dawson reported. Thomas, Elizabeth, and 3 others spanning 20 years. Richard's dirty work, swept under the rug until now. That evening, Emma sat on the porch swing, watching sunset paint Willow Creek's hills in amber and gold. Jackson joined her, passing a glass of iced tea as he settled beside her. I've been thinking about Amanda Thorne, Emma said after a comfortable silence. She knew the truth for over a year before coming forward. She was scared, yes, but also complicit in smaller wrongs that paved the way for the larger ones. Emma sipped her tea, considering. It makes me wonder how many people in this county looked the other way while Richard built his empire. How many chose comfort over confrontation? That's how men like Richard succeed, Jackson observed. They make compromise seem reasonable until you're in too deep to turn back. Thomas never compromised, Emma said softly, even knowing what it might cost, like husband, like wife. Jackson's smile held gentle pride. You could have walked away a dozen times, taken the buyout, avoided the fight. The swing creaked rhythmically. As Emma pushed with her foot, the sound blending with evening birdsong and distant lowing of cattle. I've decided to testify at Mercer's sentencing, she said finally. Not to demand punishment, but to speak about what Thomas stood for, what his life meant. Jackson nodded, understanding without need for explanation. I'll be there with you. The wedding day arrived under perfect blue skies, Willow Creek Ranch transformed with wildflower arrangements and simple elegance. Emma stood before the mirror in what had once been Thomas's office, now converted to a guest room, the dress she'd chosen, cream-colored and unfussy, catching morning light. A knock sounded, and Stanley entered at her invitation, resplendent. In his best suit, a small box in his hands. Elizabeth would have wanted you to have these, he said, opening it to reveal pearl earrings. She wore them at our engagement party before her family intervened. Stanley, I couldn't. Please, he pressed the box into her hands. You've given me the justice I sought for 40 years. Let me give you this small piece of history to carry forward. Emma hugged him impulsively. This man who'd become a father figure in the unlikeliest circumstances. Thank you. The ceremony unfolded beneath an arch of willow branches and mountain laurel, with Sheriff Dawson officiating before a gathering of those who'd stood with them through darkness into light. Ranch hands, conservation partners, fellow plaintiffs from the civil case, even Amanda Thorne, tentatively rebuilding her life through honesty. Emma and Jackson exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises not just to each other but to the land they stewarded, to the community they'd helped heal, to the future they would shape together. "I take you not as my final destination," Emma said, voice clear in the mountain air, "but as my chosen companion for the journey ahead." Jackson's response carried the depth of a man who understood both loss and discovery. "I promise to honor what came before, nurture what exists now, and protect what lies ahead, both in this land and in your heart." As they sealed their vows, with a kiss, a red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the applause that followed. Emma smiled upward, feeling Thomas's approval in the perfect timing of nature's blessing. The celebration that followed embodied everything Willow Creek now represented: sustainable local food, community connection, and optimism for the future. Miguel's wedding pies, all 12 varieties, disappeared amid laughter and conversation that flowed as freely as the creek that gave the ranch its name. As evening approached, Emma slipped away from the festivities, drawn to the hilltop where she'd first begun to imagine a future beyond grief. Jackson found her there minutes later, knowing her rhythms as surely as she knew his. "Having regrets?" he asked lightly, though his eyes searched hers with deeper concern. "The opposite." Emma took his hand, turning to face the ranch spread below, alight with lanterns and promise. "I'm thinking about how much has changed since that morning the sheriff brought the foreclosure notice, how impossible this would have seemed then." Jackson's arms circled her waist, drawing her close against the cooling evening air. "Life has a way of surprising us." "Not just life," Emma corrected, leaning into his strength. "People do too." Thomas surprised his father by standing up for what was right. "You surprised me by appearing when I needed you most, and I surprised myself by finding the courage to fight." Below them, laughter and music drifted upward as their guests continued celebrating. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the Wildlife Center's official opening, ongoing conservation work, the everyday tasks of running a ranch. But tonight was for acknowledging the journey that had brought them here. "I used to think Thomas was the brave one," Emma said softly, "standing up to Richard, protecting this land at any cost. Now I understand that courage isn't about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It's about choosing what matters day after day, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." Jackson's kiss was gentle on her temple. "That's a lesson worth building a life around." Hand in hand, they descended toward the lights and laughter, toward the community they'd helped forge through shared struggle and common purpose. The land stretched around them, scarred in places by development, protected in others by their efforts, always changing yet somehow eternal. Willow Creek Ranch had witnessed generations of human drama, love and loss, greed and sacrifice, destruction and renewal. Tonight, it embraced one more chapter in its continuing story. Not an ending, but a circle completed and expanding outward into possibility. Emma paused at the bottom of the hill, taking a final look at the twilight landscape, at what had been saved, what had been transformed, what awaited discovery. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise, like the land itself. "Ready?" Jackson asked, squeezing her hand. Emma nodded, turning toward the lights of home. "Ready. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us." 5 years later, dawn mist clung to the valley as Emma guided her horse along Willow Creek's eastern boundary. Starfire, no longer the skittish colt Thomas had been training, moved with confident grace beneath her. They crested the ridge as the sun broke through, illuminating what locals now called Caldwell's Miracle, 3,000 acres of thriving watershed, working ranch, and wildlife sanctuary seamlessly integrated. Motion in the creek bed caught her attention. She dismounted, moving quietly through high grass until she spotted the cause, a family of otters playing in the shallows, their sleek bodies darting through crystal water that ran clean thanks to conservation practices implemented upstream. Emma smiled, making a mental note to tell Dr. Ramirez, the Wildlife Center's director. River otters hadn't been documented in this stretch of creek for decades before their reintroduction program. Their presence now confirmed what satellite imagery and water quality tests already showed. The ecosystem was healing. Her phone vibrated with a text from Jackson. Visitors arrived early. "Where are you?" She tapped back quickly. "East Ridge, otters in the creek, home in 20. Remounting, Emma gave Starfire his head for the return journey. The horse seemed to sense her urgency, stretching into a ground-eating lope that brought them to the main compound as vehicles with government plates pulled up the drive. Jackson waited on the porch, their 3-year-old daughter Lizzie balanced on his hip. The child's dark curls and serious expression were pure Jackson, but her determined spirit was a blend of both parents, and perhaps a touch of Thomas, whose photograph she solemnly greeted each morning. "Sorry I'm late," Emma called, dismounting, in a fluid motion that belied her city upbringing. The watershed survey took longer than expected. Jackson passed Lizzie to Miguel's wife before greeting Emma with a quick kiss. "Perfect timing. Secretary Wilson just arrived." The Secretary of the Interior stepped from the lead vehicle, followed by his staff and several state officials. Emma recognized the governor among them. No surprise given the significance of today's announcement. "Mrs. Wade," the secretary extended his hand. "Or do you prefer Caldwell professionally?" "Emma is fine," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Welcome to Willow Creek." They gathered in the converted barn that now served as the research center's conference space. Maps and satellite images covered one wall, showing the strategic corridor of protected land extending from Willow Creek to the National Forest, 50 miles north. The president is pleased to announce federal matching funds for the expansion of the Riverdale Watershed Initiative. Secretary Wilson began once pleasantries. Concluded. "Your success here has become a model for public-private conservation partnerships nationwide." Emma exchanged glances with Jackson, both remembering the desperate days when saving just their own ranch had seemed nearly impossible. "The biological corridor you've established demonstrates that conservation and economic vitality aren't mutually exclusive." The secretary continued. "Cattle production up 20%, while water quality improved by 30%. Quite remarkable." Thomas always said healthy land produces more with less input, Emma noted. "We just implemented what he envisioned on a larger scale." After the officials departed for a tour of the wildlife rehabilitation facilities, Emma retreated to her office in the main house. The room that had once been Thomas's sanctuary now reflected her own journey. His old desk complemented by her modern equipment, awards from agricultural and environmental organizations sharing wall space with family photographs. Jackson found her there an hour later, studying satellite maps of neighboring counties. "Thinking of expanding again?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "The Morrison property," Emma confirmed. "Frank's putting it on the market next month. 3 miles of creek frontage we haven't been able to protect yet." "More land means more responsibility." Jackson's tone held no judgment, just practical consideration. "No, but the timing works with the federal funding announcement. The governor practically promised state matching grants during lunch." Jackson studied his wife's face, recognizing the familiar determination that had transformed a grief-stricken widow into one of the region's most respected conservationists. "You've got that look," he observed with a smile. "What look?" "The one. That means you've already made up your mind and are just waiting for everyone else to catch up." Emma laughed, the sound carrying through the open window to where Lizzie played under Miguel's watchful eye. "You know me too well." "Speaking of knowing you," Jackson said, his expression shifting to something more serious, "Stanley called while you were with the secretary. Amanda Thorne's parole hearing is next month. He's testifying and wondered if you want to submit a statement." Emma's hands stilled on the maps. Amanda had served 4 years for financial fraud and obstruction of justice, a reduced sentence in exchange for her testimony against Frank Mercer, who now sat on death row for Thomas's murder and 4 others. "I'll write something," she decided. She's paid her debt. More importantly, she finally chose truth over self-preservation. Jackson nodded, understanding the complex emotions attached to everyone connected with Thomas's death. Stanley also mentioned the Foundation Board meeting next week. They've selected the scholarship recipients for next fall, the Elizabeth Caldwell Memorial Scholarship, now supported 20 students annually. Young people from rural communities pursuing studies in sustainable agriculture, environmental science, and water management. Many returned to implement what they'd learned, slowly transforming the region's practices. "I should visit the university next month," Emma mused. "Meet this year's scholars, see their research projects." Their conversation paused as Lizzie burst. Through the door, chubby hands clutching a feather she'd found, a red-tailed hawk's, judging by the coloration. "Look what Mr. Miguel helped me find," she announced, presenting her treasure with the gravity of a diplomat delivering state secrets. Emma accepted it with matching seriousness. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Shall we add it to your collection?" As Lizzie detailed the feather's discovery with 3-year-old enthusiasm, Emma's gaze drifted to the photograph displayed prominently on her desk. Herself, Jackson, and Lizzie at last year's ground, the Thomas Caldwell Research Center at the State University. Their little girl, not yet understanding the significance, had stolen the show by attempting to operate the ceremonial shovel herself. After Lizzie returned to her outdoor adventures, Jackson lingered in the doorway. "Should I tell Miguel we're adding the Morrison property to our wish list?" "Not yet. I want to talk with the Conservation Trust first. Structure the deal properly." Emma's business acumen had grown alongside her environmental knowledge. "Besides, we have the center's 5th anniversary celebration to plan first, the Thomas Caldwell Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had exceeded everyone's expectations, treating over 2,000 injured animals and releasing most back to restored habitats. Its educational programs reached thousands of school children annually, and its research collaborations with universities had produced innovations in habitat restoration techniques. 5 years, Jackson mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday we were fighting just to keep this place, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime, Emma added softly. That evening, after putting Lizzie to bed, with stories of brave otters returning to their ancestral waters, Emma and Jackson walked their familiar path to the hilltop. It had become their ritual, a quiet moment to reconnect amidst the constant demands of their growing operation. The valley spread below them, ranch lights twinkling through gathering dusk. In the distance, the wildlife center's distinctive silhouette stood against the horizon, its architecture inspired by the barn that had stood on the property for generations. "I got a letter from Maria Vasquez today," Jackson said as they settled, on the weathered bench they'd placed at the summit. "Re-election campaign's going well. She's working on county-wide water protection ordinances based on our management model." "Good. We need allies in government." Emma leaned against his shoulder, watching nighthawks dart through the twilight. Especially with development pressures mounting again, the region's beauty had attracted attention beyond conservation circles. New resort proposals emerged regularly, each promising to be environmentally sensitive while conveniently requiring exceptions to protections Emma and her allies had fought to establish. "Richard would be apoplectic," Jackson observed. seeing land he viewed as development opportunities permanently protected instead. That would have mattered to me once, Emma admitted, knowing we'd thwarted his plans. Now it's just about doing what's right for the land itself. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The past 5 years had brought challenges alongside successes, droughts that tested their water management systems, budget constraints that forced creative solutions, occasional friction with neighboring landowners resistant to change. Through it all, Emma had discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed. Diplomatic skills that built unlikely alliances, technical knowledge that earned scientists respect, and leadership qualities that inspired others to follow her vision. Lizzie asked. "About Thomas again this morning," Jackson said, his tone carefully neutral. "Wanted to know if he liked otters too." Emma smiled at the memory. They'd decided early that Lizzie should know about Thomas, not as a competing figure to Jackson, but as part of her heritage, the man whose courage had made her world possible. "What did you tell her?" "That her middle name came from him, and that he loved all wild creatures, especially ones making a comeback." Jackson's arm tightened around her shoulders. That seemed to satisfy her, for now. A coyote called from the western ridge, its voice carrying clear through the evening air. Another answered from farther away, nature's conversation continuing regardless of human concerns. "I've been thinking," Emma said, watching the moon rise over distant mountains. "The Morrison property isn't just about creek frontage. It connects. 2 sections of protected habitat, creates a wildlife corridor all the way to the national forest. You're building Thomas's dream piece by piece," Jackson observed. "Our dream now," she corrected gently. "What started as honoring his memory has grown into something larger, something ours." Jackson studied her profile in the moonlight, seeing the subtle changes 5 years had wrought. Confidence that had replaced uncertainty, purpose that had transformed grief into action, love that had expanded rather than diminished with time. "The secretary mentioned the Presidential Conservation Award during lunch," he said. "Your name's on the short list." Emma waved away the honor. "The land doesn't care about awards. Results matter. Clean water, healthy wildlife, sustainable practices that can outlast us. Still, recognition helps the cause. Brings attention, funding, support." She nodded acknowledgement. "I'll accept if offered, but only on behalf of everyone involved. You, Stanley, Miguel, the research team. This was never a one-person mission." Below them, a truck's headlights wound up the access road. Stanley arriving for tomorrow's planning session. At 75, he remained actively involved in both the ranch's operations and the foundation bearing Elizabeth's name. "We should head back," Emma said, though neither moved immediately. These moments of quiet reflection had become precious in their busy lives, brief pauses to reconnect with their purpose and each other. As they eventually descended toward home, Emma paused, midway, turning to survey the ranch from this new perspective. Moonlight silvered the creek that gave the property its name, transformed pastures into velvet expanses, and softened the edges of buildings old and new. "What is it?" Jackson asked, noting her expression. "Just remembering something Thomas wrote in his journal, that land tells its own story if we listen closely enough." She gestured toward the valley. 5 years ago, this story was nearly erased. Now it's continuing, evolving. With new characters and plot twists, Jackson added with a smile. Emma nodded, taking his hand as they continued downward. "That's what makes it worth fighting for, not just preserving what was, but enabling what could be." At the ranch house, lights glowed welcome through windows. Stanley's figure appeared on the porch, waving greeting. Miguel's truck was parked nearby, his family likely inside preparing coffee and the cinnamon pastries Lizzie adored. This improvised family, bound by shared purpose rather than blood, had become the heart of Willow Creek's revival. Each member, bringing unique strengths, each committed to something larger than individual gain. "You know what today is?" Emma asked as they approached the house. Jackson's expression softened with recognition. 7 years since Thomas died, and 5 since we truly began to live his vision. She squeezed his hand. Not just survival, but regeneration. Inside, they found Stanley entertaining Lizzie with stories of her namesake's childhood adventures, the little girl rapt with attention. Miguel and his wife arranged papers on the dining table, maps and proposals for tomorrow's meeting with conservation partners. "Mama!" Lizzie launched herself at Emma. "Uncle Stanley says Grandma Elizabeth could talk to horses. Can you teach me?" Emma lifted her daughter, breathing in the sweet scent of baby shampoo and childhood. "We'll start tomorrow. Right now, it's past someone's bedtime." As Jackson took over bedtime duties, Emma settled at the table with Stanley and Miguel, reviewing the latest water quality reports from upstream properties. "The monitoring stations show improvement even beyond target projections," Stanley noted, with satisfaction. "The filtration system is exceeding expectations, and the southern herd has adapted well to the rotational grazing," Miguel added. "Better weight gain, less supplemental feed required." This was the true legacy emerging from, tragedy, not just land preserved, but methodologies proven, systems established that could be replicated elsewhere. What had begun as one widow's desperate fight to save her home had evolved into a blueprint for regional transformation. Later, after meetings concluded and guests departed, Emma found herself once more in Thomas's office. Her office now, though his presence remained in subtle ways. Her fingers traced the edge of his journal, kept not as a shrine, but as a touchstone connecting past to present. Jackson appeared in the doorway, watching her with understanding. "Remembering?" "Planning," Emma corrected, gesturing toward maps spread across the desk. "The Morrison acquisition is just the beginning. If we can demonstrate the economic benefits of our approach to neighboring ranches, one step at a time," he reminded gently, crossing to stand behind her chair. "That's how you've accomplished everything so far." Emma leaned back against him, momentarily letting the weight of responsibility lift from her shoulders. "Do you ever wonder what Thomas would think of all this? How far we've come from that desperate fight to save just this one ranch?" Jackson considered the question seriously. "I think he'd be amazed by what you've built, not just preserving his vision, but expanding it beyond anything he might have imagined." "What we've built," Emma corrected, reaching up to clasp his hand. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." Through the open window came night sounds, crickets, distant coyotes, the soft rustle of wind through cottonwoods along the creek, the land speaking its ancient language to those patient enough to listen. Emma rose, moving to the window to breathe in the scents of her world, sage after rainfall, rich earth, the subtle perfume of wildflowers that had reclaimed once overgrazed. Pastures. 7 years ago today I thought I'd lost everything, she said softly. I couldn't see beyond the grief, beyond the immediate fight to keep this land. Jackson joined her at the window, his solid presence a reminder of how life unfolds in unexpected directions, and now Emma's gaze swept across Willow Creek Ranch, not just a property, but a vision made manifest, a testament to persistence, courage, and the healing power of purpose. "Now I understand what Thomas meant about land remembering," she replied. "It remembers not just the wounds, but the healing, not just what we take, but what we give back. Above them stars wheeled in familiar patterns, the same stars that had witnessed Thomas's final drive, Richard's machinations, Emma's desperate fight, and the unexpected love that had grown from shared purpose. The same stars that would watch over Lizzie as she grew into her inheritance, not just of land, but of values, commitment, and vision. Tomorrow's a big day, Jackson reminded her as they finally turned from the window. Conservation partnership meeting, wildlife release, Lizzie's riding lesson. Emma smiled, ready at last to close the door on this anniversary, to step fully into the life they'd built from tragedy's ashes. Then we should get some sleep, she agreed. The land will still be here in the morning. Always has been, Jackson observed. Always will be. That's the point, isn't it? Emma said as they walked, hand in hand toward their bedroom. We're just passing through, borrowing from future generations. The real achievement isn't what we build, but what we enable to continue. Outside their window, Willow Creek murmured its ancient song, flowing through land once threatened, now protected, carrying its water to nurture life downstream. A continuous journey of renewal, much like the woman who had found her purpose in ensuring its perpetuation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.